also use it as a platform to go on sort of a philosophical, scientific rant about invasive species management and research for Florida reptiles. And so I want to bring some of those ideas to you today. And I brought Ali and Ken Dodd into the fold because of their expertise and experience and knowledge in the area. So the two sort of take-home points that I want to get across to you are that we need a conversation about when we should engage in major control, in my opinion, in our opinion, and that we urgently need impact studies to inform that conversation. Okay, some definitions. We're going to call all these things invasive species. The literature supports this. They're taking some bite out of the pie. Doesn't mean that it's a major problem, but we'll just call them invasives. Population level impacts or damage are when we have a reduction in populations due to invasive, in this case, that are measurable. So serious declines in populations, as opposed to individual impacts, so just dead animals, right? A lot of my work and others has shown that we can't necessarily translate individual impacts into population level impacts, right? We need science to do this. And so one contention we have, good for you to know before I keep going, is that in our opinion, controlling invasives should not be considered conservation unless we can demonstrate that there are population level impacts and that there is a measurable increase in those populations if we remove invasives. Otherwise, we say it's in the sphere of animal welfare, which is great. Love animal welfare. Love saving a turtle off the road, but I'm not going to claim it's conservation when I do so, right? And so we'd like to trade off invasives for natives whenever we can. We're not advocating that you don't do that in your backyards and such. Jordan controls raccoons in his backyard because he has tortoises. And he better hope God is not a raccoon. And so, just to be clear, we're not against control at all. So, what I want to take you on is what I think is the current climate of invasive species issues in Florida. Invasive species don't belong. Threat to humans via disease, damage, and other things. Threat to native species and communities. Economy could be put in that second one as well. And because then invasive species are bad for humans and native species, they should be eradicated, contained, or controlled. So most of us are pretty comfortable with that, right? But what I'm going to argue today is this is overly simplistic and neglects an understanding of biology of invasives, biology of impacted natives, interactions, and what we do about it. And so I want to go through those four sort of claims with these three species of notorious invaders in South Florida. So let's start with number one, and we should all be sort of on the same page here, but there is actually a group of called the New Conservationists that are advocating that we embrace invasive species. And on the journalist side of the group is led by this Fred Pierce, who published this book, The New Wild, a few years ago, in which Pierce advocates that invaders are nature at its best, the shot in the arm nature needs, add to local diversity and enrich the species' poor ecosystem, and therefore adds color and variety to the landscape. So although some of this could be true, the rest is way off target, in my opinion, and most. And this was soundly refuted by Daniel Simberloff, who's kind of considered the world expert on invasives, and where he called out Pierce on cherry picking, species of invasives that are having minor effects and ignoring the disaster stories of invasives. I don't know what that one. And so essentially, Pierce was ignoring the literature, ignoring science, and cherry picking. So I just wanted to get that out there. That's the relative disinformation that really gets under my skin, like this one. Okay, so we got that out of the way. So the rest of us are agreeing to this essentially. World economic cost of invasives is an order of magnitude greater than natural disaster costs. One of the top 5 threats to biodiversity, notorious invaders like this Nile perch that literally ate 200 native species into extinction. But everything is more complex than we want to give it credit for. And this is what I want us to slow down and think about some of these things. This idea of belonging, does it matter if we're stuck with some of these things? Cuban tree frogs, brown anoles, astronomical numbers are in everyone's backyard in South Florida, right? And there's a reasonable, I'm stepping on that. There's a reasonable, they're a reasonable idea to believe that they've had population level impacts. In the case of brown anoles on green anoles, in the case of Cuban tree frogs on native tree frogs. And yet we don't leave our house in the morning and stomp on the brown anoles in our yard, right? Where am I going with that? So what I'm going to argue is that all these other things like Tegus, Nile monitors, etc., they're just another version of this. And we're going to have a really tough time doing anything about them. So that's kind of where I'm leaning. Okay, so let's get into the nitty gritty. Number 2, threats to human disease. We'll start with the tegu. In the Mshaka book, talked about salmonella being an issue, but in fact, salmonella is not any more prevalent in tegus than any other reptile, and the secretive nature means that transmission of salmonella to humans is not really that likely with tegus. This is a fun one. Tegus are a threat to low-growing crops such as strawberries. So to me, that's like a herpetological dream, to look out over a field of strawberries and see tegus up on 2 legs eating strawberries. That would be amazing. But if it's a nightmare to some, that's fine. And either way, it's a fantasy. And so they are fruit eaters, but they're pretty secretive, solitary foragers. And Steve Johnson pointed out to me that strawberries are grown in winter, South Florida, so probably not an issue. Moving on to green iguanas, which are, get in the habit of digging burrows, and when it's communal, it's a problem. But the idea that it's compromising seawalls all over South Florida, I think, is a little bit of a stretch. It's rare enough, we think, that homeowners can employ their own control, right? Take care of it. Don't think we need to engage in major control of green iguanas because they're digging a few holes in people's backyards. There has been an issue at the tarmac in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And we get animal issues at airports, and by all means, engage in control at airports. Moving on to our Nile Monitor. No evidence that there's a risk to human health from Nile monitors. You'd have to try to catch one, which only weirdos in this room would do, right? So you're pretty safe around monitors. Also, there's these sort of vague sort of statements that they pose a risk to livestock, and that's probably untrue. There's a report of them attacking chickens. Small pets, this seems to be mostly rumors. I'm sure it could happen, but these animals are super secretive, and possibly that's because they are controlled a bit. So we can have a debate about that sometime. Damage to, this is the same kind of thing as the digging burrows thing. All these work has shown so far, it's pretty early days, but that they're using burrows that are already there, not doing a lot of digging. And this one, we're still working on trying to find out where this mystery millions of dollars of damage has been caused by invasive reptiles to control structures and roadways in Florida. So we'll let you know if we find it. Moving on to 3, the threats to species. So with Tegus, the Mashaka talks about the possibility that these tegus will displace and affect things like ground nesting birds and burrowing owls and gopher tortoises. Not much evidence for that. In fact, you tell me what to do. How many fingers? So we do have an issue here potentially with American crocodiles. They're getting close to crocodile nests and they eat the eggs of gators, turtles, etc. And we need more evidence. We need population studies. The odd clutch of eggs getting eaten by a tegu doesn't mean that it's a population level impact. So we need more science here. With the green iguanas, this one's kind of fun. So iguanas have observed affecting a number of imperiled species, such as Florida burrowing owl, by usurping burrows. I mean, you go into this paper, the owl ate the iguana. And then there was a story about how they might be spreading invasive plants across South Florida. And so all these things are good ideas, but they're fantasies until we get data, right? So unfortunately, they're being used to kind of push for control, major control. So others have suggested that that's probably not true. There's no evidence that Nile monitors are competing with native species. Of course, they will be to some extent. Whether or not it's a problem, we don't know. We need impact studies. They do prey on native species, and we're kind of waiting to see which ones they get. And as they move, if they move Cape Coral into wilder areas with species of more importance, then we need to track that. Okay, so based on the literature, we all know that prevention is the key, and we need better regulations on the pet trade. We should have never had Burmese pythons in people's houses, right? And we can say that in hindsight. So hopefully that improves, or we're just going to have to deal with these same things over and over again. If you review the literature, eradication is something that really doesn't happen unless it's on an island. So that's not going to happen. We're arguing that containment of these things is similar to eradication. It's impossible in places like the Everglades. And this has put me at odds with folks like Doody, who I have tremendous respect for. He said that if we had more resources, we could have stopped tegus from going into Everglades National Park. I disagree. No way, in my opinion, that we can stop these things. I watched cane toads over the last 30 years march across Australia and seen all these sorts of patterns, statements, attempts to control, etc. So I'm trying to help get us a little bit quicker ahead of where we are based on that experience. And so as we move further, we get to the actual control where we're trying to reduce numbers. What's that about? Oh, yeah, I made the statement in a paper that trying to stop an invasive species like this is like trying to stop a hurricane. Sorry if that gives you guys PTSD. Although Matt said he's like, this is a great opportunity. Hurricane's coming. So long-term control, we advocate that it's major long-term control should only be engaged when there is population level damage on native species or some impact on humans that requires us politically to address it. And that we can show that control will reverse or at least reduce the damage. Probably should put that one in that's sustainable, that the control is sustainable in the long term, but because budget money comes and goes, that's a bit hard to hold people accountable on that one. Okay, so despite this, the FWC invited folks to remove and kill iguanas from a bunch of green spaces in Miami without a license or permit. And so you got all these people out killing iguanas in various ways. And sort of you can watch the YouTube, I stopped at 200 of them. But it's creating a false narrative that we're actually doing something good for humans, the economy, or ecosystems. It also sends a negative message about reptiles, in my opinion, in our opinion. So we think we should leave control up to, in this case, the homeowners. Do your own control if you like you would mice, rats, roaches, whatever in your backyard. Because your neighbor might like iguanas and your other neighbor is indifferent, right? It varies across the community. And so we don't like that we're sanctioning widespread control. That's not doing any good. What do I got? 1 minute? It's the break, so I'm going to steal that minute. So
Take the minute.
just quickly, Night and Knolls, I thought I'd put this in. It's kind of fun at the end here. So Mishak et al. Said that Night and Knolls may place native vertebrates at risk. You guys have seen these things, right? Indeed, they do prey on other lizards. Most of them, though, are invasive lizards, and I'm sure they would affect green anoles. But as a result, they call these guys the potential T-Rex of the trees. And it's funny, someone else came up with the idea of them being Vegisaurus. We like that one better. So they're mostly eating fruits and stuff. Burmese pythons, no discredit to Ian and all the amazing stuff they're doing out there. And we're going to need them probably somewhere. We're going to need a population of natives that we got to save or protect. And we're going to need their techniques and their biology and knowledge to do that. But if you do the math across the whole of South Florida where these things are, it's a drop in the bucket removals so far. Just can't stop them. And therefore, we can't reduce their effects across that kind of scale. And that's led to all this stuff where we have these rodeos and skin a snake division, competitions for kids and all this stuff. And now all this stuff is coming across to kids and the next generation. And I think we need to make sure we got the science in place to inform the control so that we don't give people the wrong impression. These guys are saying they're saving the Everglades one python at a time, and that's just not true, right? So this one speaks for itself. I'm not going to say anything. Okay, so take home. We need more evidence. There are threats for a lot of these species. We know for the pythons it's a threat. And so we need impact studies, and they're not that expensive. There's little evidence that when there is an impact that we can do anything with our control efforts. And so finally, any actions taken in the name of removals and impacts need to be guided by science and not assumptions that there's a major problem. Thanks.
Get off stage.